Sarah stood on the edge of the field, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind whistled across the dry plains of Garin 9, a harsh planet where the sun burned with a fury that seemed never to cool. She had been running for hours, dodging the guards and weaving through the narrow alleyways of the colony. She was exhausted, but she had to keep going. Her mother was sick, and Saris had no other choice but to steal food for her. The desperate hunger that gnawed at her own stomach wasn't enough to stop her from pushing forward. She had seen what starvation did to people, and she refused to let it take her mother. Garin 9 was not a kind planet. It had once been a thriving world, but the wars had torn it apart, leaving only small settlements scattered across the surface. The inhabitants, both human and alien, had been forced to fight for survival. Now all that remained were broken societies, struggling to hold on to what little they had. Saris, an alien girl from a fallen colony, had been forced to adapt. Theft had become her only way of surviving. She had learned how to move quickly, how to blend into the shadows, how to avoid the watchful eyes of the colony's guards. Her alien technology, implanted when she was just a child, allowed her to move faster, think quicker, and survive longer than most. But it couldn't protect her from the consequences of stealing from the wrong person. And today, she had done just that. Saris ducked into an alley and stopped to catch her breath. Her fingers gripped the small sack of food she had stolen, but she didn't dare stop long enough to check what she had managed to grab. Every second counted. She could hear the footsteps of the guards growing closer. Their heavy boots echoed off the walls of the narrow street, and the sound made Saris's heart race even faster. She glanced over her shoulder, trying to calculate how far they were behind her. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now, but fate had other plans. She turned a corner, hoping to escape into the maze of back streets, only to run straight into a tall figure. The impact knocked the wind out of her and she stumbled back, her heart leaping into her throat. "Going somewhere," a voice growled. Saris's eyes snapped up. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the worn clothes of a farm worker. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and calculating. He was no soldier, but he looked dangerous in a way that made Saris's instincts scream to run. The man stood there, blocking her path, his expression unreadable. Saris's mind raced. He was human, but that didn't mean he would let her go. She had been caught stealing before, and it never ended well. She needed to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The man didn't move. He simply watched her, his eyes scanning her face, searching for something. Saris's breath quickened as she tried to steady herself. She had to think of a way out. She had always been good at escaping, good at running. But this time, it felt different. This man wasn't like the others she had encountered. He wasn't yelling, demanding she surrender. He was waiting for her to make the next move. "Why are you stealing?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Saris froze. No one ever asked why. They just assumed she was a criminal. But this man, he was different. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatening her. His question caught her off guard, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. Her mouth went dry. I needed the food," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mother is sick. She needs medicine. We have nothing left." The man seemed to consider her words for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. "I see," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You're not the first to do what you've done, but that doesn't change the fact that you stole from me." Saris's heart sank. She had hoped he might let her go, maybe even understand. But the reality of the situation hit her hard. She had been caught. There was no escaping this time. The guards would be here any second, and she would be dragged away. She would never see her mother again. She would be tossed into the cold, unforgiving world of Garin 9, just another criminal caught in a system that never cared. The man shifted, his eyes hardening as he took a step closer. Saris braced herself for the inevitable. But then something strange happened. Instead of pulling out a weapon or calling for the guards, the man simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dusty pouch. "I don't know what you're running from," he said, his voice low, "but I'll make you a deal. You can work for me, work my fields, I'll give you food, and I won't turn you in, but you'll owe me. You steal from me again and I won't show you mercy." Saris's mind raced. The offer was unexpected. She had been expecting punishment or worse, the cold hand of the authorities. But this man, he was offering something different. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she had no other choice. She had to take it, for her mother. She nodded silently, her heart pounding. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest. She was caught in a game that she didn't fully understand, but she knew she had to play it. There was no other way out. "I'll work for you," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "But you have to promise me you'll help my mother. She's all I have left." The man looked at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then he gave a single nod. "Get up," he said, offering her his hand. "Let's go." And just like that, Saris's life changed forever. As Saris followed the man to his farm, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. This wasn't how she imagined things would go. She had expected to be punished, to be thrown into a prison cell or worse. But instead, this man, a stranger, had offered her something she didn't think she deserved, a chance to survive. The journey to his farm was long and silent. Saris walked behind him, her thoughts racing. She wasn't sure what to make of him. He was human, after all. Humans and aliens hadn't always gotten along. But this man, he didn't look at her with hatred or fear. He looked at her like she was just another person. And that, more than anything, confused her. When they arrived at the farm, Saris was taken aback by the sight. The land was vast, stretching out into the distance, with rows of crops growing in neat lines. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had ever seen in her life. The man, whose name she learned was Jason, showed her around the fields and explained the work that needed to be done. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. "You'll work here by day," Jason explained, his voice calm and steady. "And at night you'll stay in the bunkhouse. No funny business, just work. If you do a good job, I'll feed you. If not, you leave." Saris nodded. The rules were simple enough. Work, eat, survive. That was all she wanted. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small flicker of hope. The days that followed were long and exhausting. Saris threw herself into the work, determined to prove herself. She learned how to tend to the crops, how to water them, and how to protect them from the harsh sun. It wasn't easy, but it was better than anything she had ever known. For the first time, she felt like she had a purpose. Jason didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. He showed her what needed to be done, and she did it. There was no room for hesitation or doubt. The work was hard, but it was honest. And for the first time in her life, Saris found herself grateful for it. By night, she stayed in the bunkhouse, a small, plain building on the edge of the farm. It wasn't much, but it was warm. And for someone who had spent most of her life fighting to survive, warmth felt like a luxury she could hardly believe. As the days passed, Saris began to notice something strange. Jason wasn't just a farmer. There was something in the way he moved, something in the way he carried himself that made her realize he was just anyone. He had a past, a heavy one. One evening, as they sat around a small fire after a long day of work, Saris couldn't help but ask. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Why help me? You don't know me, I could be lying, I could be trouble. Why take the risk?" Jason looked at her for a long moment, his eyes distant. Finally, he spoke. "I've seen too many people suffer on this planet," he said slowly. "Too many people who didn't deserve it. I've fought in wars, fought for things I thought mattered. But in the end, it was all for nothing. Now, I just want to help where I can. I don't expect anything in return. I just want to make sure someone has a chance at something better than what I had." Saris didn't know what to say. For a moment, there was silence between them. The crackle of the fire was the only sound, and for the first time in a long time, Saris felt a sense of peace. She had no idea where this strange alliance would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was hope. And that, in itself, was enough. The days on the farm were long, but for Saris, they were a strange kind of relief. She had never known such simplicity, such quiet. No one was chasing her, no one was hunting her down for the food she stole. Here, on Jason's farm, she was just a worker, doing her part to survive. And as the days turned into weeks, Saris found herself adjusting to the rhythm of farm life. The work was hard, but it gave her purpose. Every morning, Jason would lead her into the fields, where they tended to the crops. The sun beat down relentlessly, but Saris found herself growing stronger with each passing day. Her body, once weakened by hunger and fear, was now gaining strength from the physical labor. The alien technology embedded in her body allowed her to work faster and with more endurance than any human could, but Jason never complained. He simply watched, sometimes nodding in approval, sometimes saying nothing at all. It was clear that he didn't expect perfection, but Saris pushed herself to be the best she could. At night, when the work was done, she would go back to the small bunkhouse where she slept. It was nothing fancy, just a place to rest after a long day, but it was hers. For the first time in her life, she had a place to call her own, a place where she could close her eyes and forget about the world outside. As the weeks went by, Saris began to notice things about Jason. He was a man of few words, but there was something in his eyes that spoke volumes. He didn't ask questions, but when he looked at her, it was as though he could see through her, as if he knew her struggles without her having to say a word. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken bond that had formed out of necessity and survival. And in a way, Saris began to trust him, though she didn't fully understand why. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in the fields, Saris sat on the porch of the bunkhouse, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, a beautiful sight that seemed so out of place on a planet like Garin 9. The planet was barren and harsh, but in moments like this, when the sun set and the wind calmed, there was a fleeting sense of peace. Jason came up behind her, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there beside her, looking out at the fading light. Saris didn't look at him, but she could feel his presence beside her. It was comforting in a strange way. "I used to hate this place," Jason said, his voice low. "This farm, this land. I came here after the wars. Thought it would be easy, just work the land, forget about everything else. But it was. It was hard, harder than I ever imagined. And there were days when I wanted to leave it all behind. But I stayed." Saris glanced up at him, surprised by the admission. Jason had always seemed so calm, so collected, that she never imagined he'd struggled with the farm. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Why stay?" Jason hesitated before answering, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Because sometimes, when everything else feels like it's falling apart, the only thing you can do is keep going, keep working. You survive because you have no choice." Saris didn't respond at first. She understood what he meant. She had lived her life by the same rule: survive. No matter the cost, no matter the pain, you survive. It was the only thing that kept her going, the only thing that made sense in a world so broken. "I used to have a family," Jason continued, his voice tinged with sadness. "A wife, 2 kids. They were taken from me during the wars. I couldn't protect them. After that, I didn't know what to do with myself. I came here, thinking maybe I could forget, thinking maybe I could just work and find some peace. But it's never that simple." Saris felt a pang in her chest as she listened to him. She had lost her family too. She had seen the destruction of her people, the betrayal, the violence. She had learned to live with the pain, to bury it deep inside her. But hearing Jason's words brought it all back, the emptiness, the grief. It was a bond they shared, even if they didn't speak of it often. For a moment the two of them stood in silence, the weight of their shared loss hanging between them. The sun had nearly set, and the sky had turned dark, but neither of them moved. It was as though time had slowed down, allowing them both a brief respite from the world around them. Finally, Jason spoke again, his voice softer now. I don't know what your life was like before you came here, Saris, but you're safe here, for as long as you want. No one's going to take you from this farm. I'll make sure of that. Saris turned to look at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how to respond. For so long, she had lived with the belief that safety was something she could never have. That survival came at a cost. That trusting someone meant opening herself up to betrayal. But here, with Jason, it felt different. Maybe it was the simplicity of farm life, or maybe it was Jason's quiet promise. But for the first time in a long time, Saris allowed herself to believe in something other than survival. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll stay, I'll work, I'll do what I can." Jason nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good, that's all I ask." And so, life on the farm continued. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Saris and Jason fell into a routine. She worked the fields, tended to the crops, and learned everything there was to know about farming. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. It was a kind of peace Saris had never known. But there were moments, late at night when the farm was quiet and the stars filled the sky, that Saris would lie awake in her small bed, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that there was more to her story than the simple life she had built here. She had come to this farm to escape the chaos of her past, but her past was never far behind. It lingered in her thoughts, in her dreams, a constant reminder of the life she had lost. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Saris found herself standing by the small stream that ran through the edge of the farm. She watched the water flow, the soft rush of it soothing her tired muscles. She didn't hear Jason approach, but she felt his presence behind her. "I'm not used to this," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the sound of the water. "This, peace. I don't know how to be at peace." Jason stepped closer, his footsteps soft on the ground. "You don't have to be at peace right now," he said gently. "You just have to keep going, day by day. You'll figure it out." Saris turned to face him, meeting his steady gaze. "And what about you?" she asked. "How do you keep going?" Jason didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her with those deep, knowing eyes. "I keep going because I have to, for myself, for them." His voice faltered slightly, but he quickly composed himself. "We all have our reasons for keeping on. You'll find yours." Saris wasn't sure what to say. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know where this journey would take her or what would happen tomorrow. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. The days passed and Saris grew stronger, not just physically but emotionally. She began to trust Jason more, and in doing so she began to trust herself. She no longer lived in constant fear of being caught, of being hunted. She was free, free in a way she had never known. But freedom, like everything else, came with its own set of challenges. The past had a way of catching up, and Saris knew that no matter how much she tried to outrun it, the ghosts of her old life would always be there. The choices she had made, the people she had lost, they were all part of her story. But now she had a new chapter, and for the first time she was ready to write it. Life on the farm had become a new reality for Saris, a reality she had never thought possible. Every day she woke to the sound of birds chirping and the sun rising over the endless fields. The work was still hard, but now it had meaning. She was no longer just surviving. She was building something, no matter how small. And for the first time in her life, Saris allowed herself to imagine a future where she didn't have to run, didn't have to hide. The bond between her and Jason grew stronger as the weeks passed. He was quiet but dependable. He didn't demand anything from her except hard work, and in return, he gave her something she had never experienced: trust. It was a slow process for her to accept it fully, but with each passing day, she began to feel a sense of belonging she never thought she would find. This wasn't just about the work, it was about something deeper, something she couldn't quite put into words. As Saris worked alongside Jason, she started to understand the land more. She learned the rhythms of farming, the seasons, the weather, the soil. She came to appreciate the quiet moments when she could sit and watch the plants grow, knowing she had helped them get there. It was a strange feeling, one she wasn't used to, but it was a good one. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was just one step away from destruction. She felt stable, but even in moments of peace, there were reminders of the life she had left behind. Every now and then, when the work was done, Saris would sit alone in the bunkhouse, her mind drifting to memories of the past. The sound of her mother's weak cough, the coldness of the streets as she ran, the hunger that gnawed at her stomach. It was hard to shake off those memories. They clung to her, always present in the back of her mind. She had learned to bury them for a while, to push them down under the surface, but they were still there, waiting to resurface. One evening, after a long day's work, Saris was sitting on the porch again, looking out over the fields. Jason was inside, preparing the evening meal. The sky was darkening, and the stars were beginning to appear, scattered across the sky like diamonds. The quiet of the night wrapped around her, a welcome break from the noise of the day. Her thoughts wandered again, and she found herself thinking about her people, about the world she had come from, the war, the devastation, the losses. She had lost so much, so many people. But she had made it here to this farm with Jason. She had found a place where she could breathe, where she could survive. But was that enough? Could she truly move on from everything she had been through? She didn't have an answer, and that was okay for now. Jason came outside carrying a plate of food. He set it down beside her and sat down next to her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. It had become part of their routine, this shared quiet. After a while, Jason spoke, his voice low. "You're different now, I can see it." Saris didn't look at him right away. She wasn't sure what he meant by that, but she knew deep down that she had changed. The work, the life she was building had changed her. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first arrived. But was it enough? Was she enough? "I don't know what you mean," she said softly, finally turning to look at him. "I'm just here, just surviving." Jason smiled a little, though it was tinged with sadness. "You're more than just surviving, Saris. You're living. You've stopped running." Saris didn't know how to respond to that. It felt strange to hear. She wasn't sure if she believed it, but there was a part of her that wanted to. "I guess," she said after a long pause. "But it's hard, the past. It's hard to forget." Jason nodded slowly. I know better than most, but you don't have to forget, you just have to keep moving forward." Saris felt a weight in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and sadness. She had never imagined she would find comfort here in this quiet place with Jason. But she was starting to understand what he meant. Maybe the past would never completely fade away. Maybe the pain would always be there, lingering in the background. But it didn't have to control her. She didn't have to let it dictate her every action. The next day, the peace they had found was shattered. A loud noise broke through the stillness of the farm, followed by the sound of heavy boots crunching on the gravel. Saris's heart stopped. She recognized the sound, the guards, the authorities. Jason was already moving, heading toward the house, his face hardening. "Stay here," he said to Saris, his voice low and urgent. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her heart was racing. She had been living in fear of this moment since she arrived. The authorities had found her. They had come to take her back. Jason stopped, turning back to her. "Stay hidden. Don't come out." Saris nodded, her mind racing. She had to think. She had to do something. She watched as Jason stepped out into the open, facing the approaching figures. His back was straight, his posture tense, but he didn't back down. There was no fear in his eyes, just determination. The guards came closer, and Saris's breath hitched. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The farm was isolated, but not isolated enough. They would find her. "You're trespassing," Jason said, his voice firm but calm. "What do you want?" One of the guards, a tall man with a hard face, sneered. "We're looking for a fugitive," he said, his voice rough. An alien girl. She's been stealing from the settlements. We have orders to bring her in. Saris's heart pounded in her chest. She was that fugitive. She had known this day might come, but that didn't make it any easier. The fear she had been holding in for so long surged to the surface. Jason didn't flinch. "She's not here." The guard raised an eyebrow. "You're lying. We've tracked her to this location. We know she's here." Jason's eyes were cold now. "You're not going to find her." For a moment there was silence. The guards exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to do next. Then, without another word, they turned and left, their footsteps echoing in the distance. Sarah stayed hidden in the bunkhouse, her heart still racing. She didn't know what had happened, but she was grateful. Grateful that Jason had stood up for her. Grateful that he had protected her, even though they didn't know each other that well. When the last of the footsteps faded, Jason came back inside. His face was tense, but he didn't say anything at first. Sarah couldn't find the words to speak either. Her thoughts were too jumbled, too full of fear and gratitude. She didn't know how to process what had just happened. Finally, Jason spoke. "They'll be back. It's not over." Sarah nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I know." Jason took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "We'll leave. We'll leave this farm if we have to, but I'm not giving up on this place. Not yet." Sarah looked at him, her heart full of conflicting emotions. "What will we do? We'll keep working. We'll keep surviving, together." And for the first time, Sarah felt the weight of her past lift slightly. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore.